Vidmori POV. My eyes opened to an array of lights floating around me. It was a rather beautiful display as I slowly glanced around. Looking toward Revere, I could see and sense the bewildered curiosity plain on her face as she looked between each orb of light, clearly getting more information from her side of this magic circle than I was. "What is it?" I asked carefully, not wanting to break her focus too much from whatever she was doing to maintain her end of the magic circle. Revere took a few moments to gather herself as she spoke up. I'm not sure what to make of all this," she admitted, looking around some more before continuing. "This magic circle displays your magical affinities as you are now. Generally, this is used for fledgling mages, who are still in their discovery stages, as it were, in order to set them down their easiest paths. However, affinities can be developed and discovered over a mage's lifetime. New paths forged which can broaden your range of magic," she explained, before gesturing to all the lights. "While you don't have access to all magics, I've never seen an inexperienced mage with a connection to so many paths of magic, especially with such a deep understanding of that. You have a connection to all 4 primal magics. While it is not unheard of, it is still surprising for one as inexperienced as you. Air is the weakest, then water. You have a good bond with earth, and finally there's fire. If I didn't know better, I would have said you were a fire elemental, or perhaps even a fire dragon," she explained, excitement creeping into her voice as I sensed her marveling at the possibilities. "You have such a deep understanding of fire and its properties, though I suppose I shouldn't be too surprised as to how you have such an understanding," she mentioned, her expression and tone going somber at the realization she had. This confused me for a moment before I remembered that she'd seen my memories. "Ah, right. Yeah, I suppose that could do it," I replied. "Fire has been my greatest ally and my worst nightmare over the years. I've experienced its use in all aspects of its nature, and I know exactly what it can do to the human body, among other things." I offered her a small smile as I watched her fret over bringing up this part of my past, and spoke up to try and console her. "Don't linger too much on it. It was quite literally another lifetime. Don't let my memories burden you," I offer in a gentle voice. I could sense Revere taking my words to heart as she sighed softly, collecting herself as she looked among the orbs of light once more. "Beyond the 4 primal magics and the related fusions of those magics, you have access to many rather unusual and esoteric branches of magic," she mentioned, as her eyes continued to wander. "Darkness and light magics, opposites and unusual branches to fully specialize in," she said, as she tilted her head. "Adventurers or criminals generally tap into these branches for the illusions they can access, as well as stealth magics that aid in their endeavors," she explained. "Though you have an understanding of both branches, you have a much greater connection to the darkness." "Well, I did most of my work in the dark. I learned to move in the shadows and conceal myself from my enemies. As for light, well, I'd say you would be surprised how much there is to know about light," I mentioned with a bit of a smile, though I considered what she said and tilted my head a bit. "I also think you'd be surprised by the depth of darkness and shadow. It's more than illusions and stealth, I'd say, and I don't mean that poetically," I mused, as I pointedly rolled my shoulders. "Besides, you might want to see what Basti can do with shadows and darkness. I'm sure even you can learn from her." Revere nodded intently, and I could sense that she felt unsure about my claims. She was keeping an open mind about my unique situation, as she looked to a different area of the magic circle. "Spatial magic was to be expected, if we consider your ability to store vast amounts of things in your personal storage space, though here is an unusual one," she mentioned, as she brought a particular orb of light to focus. "Soul magic. Even I know of very few with natural affinities for soul magic. Usually they're used by churches and places of law and order to measure someone's character. It's rare to see anyone even having a connection to it, but their services are valued and sought out if a mage is shown to have a talent in the field, she explained, as she made a face. I could sense she was considering me and something she had seen before speaking up. That reminds me, you've created artificial souls before, haven't you? Dread and the Sinners, right? She said slowly, as she mulled over the idea. It's something called an ego, which is usually only applied to things like weapons and armor. They're incredibly rare and are often used as partners to mages and various warriors, using their innate properties to guide, protect, or magically heal and support their wielders. Though most instances are usually made by fiends, dragons, and fae, however, even elves, dwarves, and the odd human mage have created them before. But I've never heard of ego being potent enough to control and manage an entire body, she explained, mulling over the information as she scratched the back of her head. I consider her words before offering a piece of information that might be helpful for her in her endeavor to understand me better. That might have something to do with the aspects I was granted when I was placed here in this world. At the mention of aspects, I could see her pointed ears twitch with surprise as she looked at me with wide eyes. I could sense that she was heavily doubting what she heard just now and hesitated to speak, so I just continued. Upon my death, I heard a voice listing all these titles and explaining how I affected those around me in my world, those I killed, those I saved, and how many zombies I exterminated. I explained slowly. The whole experience was all somewhat surreal now that I'm reflecting on it. I suppose I was numb to the experience due to the sheer shock and confusion of what was suddenly happening to me. It was something called karmic influence, though I'm still uncertain about it all. Perhaps if I had access to that system Historietta talked about, I would know more. But it's not like I care all that much, since I don't need to know how everything in the world works to live in it, I said, doing a little bit of hand-waving, though Revere seemed to listen intently, patiently waiting for me to say the point of what I had to say. I was granted the aspects of life and death during that time, and later, after Basti put an end to what was left of Lichdran, I inherited her aspect of creation. Revere's face was calm and stoic as she closed her eyes, though her mind was a swirling storm of theories, ideas, and speculation. We sat silently for a few minutes before Revere opened her eyes and sighed softly. A lot of things are starting to make sense now, she admitted, as she looked into the orbs of light around me. I was uncertain what to make of what I saw when I first looked at the magic you had access to, which is why I was saving them for last, she said, as she brought forward two orbs. Life and death magic. Your connection to them is even more potent than your connection to fire. Healing and destruction, communication with those beyond the veil of the ether, and being able to pull those beyond the veil back into their mortal forms, or other vessels. If I had to put a sort of label on your connection to these forms of magic, it would be the term aspect. Not even the Saintess of Gaia can claim to have such a strong connection to life magic as you. Not that you even know how to harness that magic. Though the same could be said for your connection to death. Not that I know any publicly labelled figures to be known as Saint or Saintess of Death, but you would have a deeper connection to this branch of magic than them. I nodded intently. It all sounded very impressive, but I'm still having a hard time putting weight behind all these concepts and ideas. Though I can sense that all this is starting to stress Revere somehow, what is bothering her, in particular, is not clear to me. Your ears twitched with surprise when I mentioned aspect. Why did that word get a reaction out of you? I asked, cutting to the point as best I could. Revere's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, as one hand reached up to one of her ears, before she cleared her throat and spoke up. I recognized the term since I had read about it during my historical studies. It was used to describe individuals who had been blessed by the gods. Aspects were often either great heroes or great evils who were blessed for their achievements, though it was often recorded that aspects were granted their blessings in anticipation of what they would do, she said, as she ran her finger through her hair, staring at the ground before looking up into my eyes. I'm not worried about you or how you would use your powers. You are a good man, and I have no doubt you would use these powers mostly for the benefit of others, she said, as she offered a smile, though she furrowed her brows and continued her thought. What I am worried about is why someone of your potential would appear in the world as you are, not to mention the idea that multiple gods and goddesses seem to have their eyes on you and the Empress of all people, she explained, sounding a little bewildered as she considered Historietta. An escalation like this does not bode well for the future, she says, or signs some more. I do want to say that I was told there will be some calamity around 4 years from now. What it is, I don't exactly know, but it is something at least. I mentioned it since it was the only thing that came to mind when she talked about the future. Revere looked surprised, but didn't really seem to panic or look overly concerned, managing to remain apathetic towards the information. I see. Well, that would make sense, especially making you this powerful if this supposed calamity is in the near future. But what could possibly be brewing in the background for your presence to be needed? She pondered, maintaining her composure as she viewed everything in a strictly analytical way. Well, didn't you mention that there's some kind of warlord on a path of conquest overseas? It was the whole reason Emperor Ferodius performed his warpath of unification on this continent, I mentioned, looking at the orbs of light around me before looking into her eyes and watching her while she looked elsewhere thoughtfully. She hummed and thought. It is possible, but can we really consider that to be a calamity? She asked, as she returned my gaze. Well, I can't say for sure, but all it takes is a single stone to cause a wave. Who knows what that warlord's warpath will lead to or disturb? I offer for her consideration. Ravin nodded intently, before dispelling the magic circle and standing. I did note that there were a few more orbs of light that we hadn't reviewed, but it seemed like we were moving on at this point. Well, in that case, we shouldn't dwell on what may be and focus on what we can do now. And what I can do now is show the basics of how to wield your abilities, so you can be ready for whatever may come, she exclaimed, full of false bravado and fake enthusiasm, and I could tell she was putting on a brave front and wasn't taking her own words to heart, but I was not about to call her on it. I stand as well, walking over and patting her shoulder. Well then, I'll be in your care, I say, as I flash a small smile. Revere returned my smile, this time managing to pull a real one on her face as she looked around. I think we should make our way to the river. With fire being your primary element, it would be better to be closer to a water source, she considered, a hint of amusement in her voice. I chuckled softly, bobbing my head in agreement. Lead the way.